Hello and welcome to this Internet Retailing and RetailX webinar. Today we're looking at the optimal route for retail's sustainable future. Very hot topic. We're going to be delving into how can retailers practically reach their emissions targets against the backdrop of rapid and sustained e-commerce growth that shows no sign of slowing down. We're going to find out how to do that. I'm Paul Skeldon, one of the editors at the Internet Retailing and its research arm, RetailX, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ryan Walker, lead product owner, fulfilment and operations at Dyson. Hello, Ryan. And Daniel Hudson, Director UK and Europe for FarEye. I'm going to let them both introduce themselves in a moment so you can get a bit of a better idea of where they stand and how they are coming at this topic. Sustainability is, of course, increasing as a business driver for many retailers. Consumers want to deal with brands that have primarily got good environmental credentials. But how do they make that happen as a retailer? Research out last week that I covered on Internet Retailing from PFS finds that lots of retailers get it, but they find the cost and complexity is still seen as a barrier, and many just simply don't know, I think, where to start. So today we're going to try and uncover how to overcome some of those barriers in practical ways and look at how you can start to implement some sustainability strategies for your e-commerce-led retail business. First, I'm going to let Danny set the scene, and then we're going to hear from Ryan as to how Dyson is making this happen out there in the retail world. So welcome, Ryan and Danny. Danny, I guess if you could just quickly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what FarEye does, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. So my name's Danny Hudson. I am the director for retail here in Europe at FarEye. And my background is 20 plus years in supply chain and logistics technology, helping companies invest, implement and drive value from technology that they buy with regards to their supply chain and logistics operations.
Great stuff. And Ryan, I think most people probably know who Dyson are, but just in case, quick heads up on the company and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure, Paul. So, Ryan Walker, product owner for Fulfilment and Operations, which broadly means that I'm responsible for the customer proposition that we showcase to our consumers on .co.uk and all of our other global sites, right the way through the chain through to supply chain operations and mobilizing that proposition. Of course, Dyson, global technology company, manufacturer, and in the last 5 to 10 years, online retailer.
Excellent stuff. Brilliant. Well, looking forward to hearing what Dyson's doing around sustainability. But first, before we get into that, I think, Danny, if you could perhaps set the scene for us a bit as to what some of the issues are that face retailers and what some of the sort of potential things they can look at to make some headway in having a sustainable operation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. So look, I'm assuming that most people don't actually know who FarEye are. So let me just take a minute, if that's okay, to sort of give a bit of background. So we're a software company headquartered out of Noida in India. And our product is designed as a transportation platform to orchestrate your last mile operations. So everything post-purchase, if you like, provide visibility both internally and externally to all of your, partners within your ecosystem, and to drive that customer experience. So I think, certainly one of the trends that we've seen happening in the marketplace over the past few years is how, customers' needs, customers' wants, customer service levels are actually driving, what needs to be done in terms of supply chain. And things are becoming more and more complex, more and more challenging, more and more parties for retailers to actually work with externally, and bringing all of that together and doing it in an optimal way, a cost-effective way, efficient way, is becoming more and more challenging. And that's really where the FarEye solution lends itself in terms of driving some of that optimization and making sure that with regards to the assets that a company has to obviously execute with regards to their post-purchase operations within last mile, they're optimized and used efficiently to drive things. So that's just a little bit about what FarEye do. And I'd be happy to pick up conversations with anybody with regards to adding a bit more color or providing a bit more information.
Great stuff. Is that aimed at retailers and brands and logistics companies, or how does it sort of sit in the value chain?
It is, Paul. It's we don't just work with retailers. We work with brand companies like Dyson, so manufacturing and wholesale. as well. And we also work closely with the 3PL space. And I think in terms of, if you look at some of the complexity in last mile, so that kind of delivery piece, what we're all seeing is the fact that there are a lot of partners to collaborate with to do it efficiently, and actually, being able to do that across that network and that ecosystem is becoming more and more challenging. Whether you're a retailer, whether you're a wholesaler, whether you're a manufacturer, or whether you're a logistics company.
Cool, excellent, great stuff.
So I think we've already touched on something, that is, I suppose, hot topic already in terms of complexity. And certainly when you look at, I'm going to say, that environmental, sustainable and governance perspective with regards to supply chain and logistics, it's continuing to evolve. And obviously companies are under a lot more pressure, whether that be sort of government legislation or European legislation, worldwide legislation, right down towards sort of local legislation. So here in the UK, we've obviously got things like the congestion zone in London. Bristol are implementing a clean air zone as of 2022. Other cities are no longer obviously going to follow that way. So that actual landscape of what companies are having to deal with regards to the environment, with regards to making themselves more sustainable, is moving and continually evolving, but it's also becoming a lot more complex. I think other things that are taking, I suppose, adding to that complexity are modes of delivery. So we're going to electric vehicles, to bikes, to walking, to all sorts of different modes of delivery. Services are being demanded continually by us as consumers. We're continually looking at, can we get it now? Can we get it in 2 days? What service do I want for myself? And like I've already touched on, the number of partners and collaborators that companies are now having to work with within their sort of post-purchase experience, last mile, final mile piece, is only increasing as well. So how do I sort of bring all of that together under an umbrella and make it work for me so that I'm kind of hitting my KPIs and sustainability goals that governments and legislation is driving me towards, plus probably my investors and shareholders, but also doing it in an efficient way. So I think what we're certainly seeing, and it'd be great to get Ryan to maybe just talk a little bit about this from a Dyson perspective as well, is that continual evolution, complexity increasing, and those partners and collaborators also increasing as well. But Ryan, if you've got anything to add, please do.
I think it comes down to we've seen a huge pivot, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, where consumers are driving organisations or retailers like Dyson to have a much stronger sustainable proposition, whether that's through their brand ethos, which I'll touch on a little bit shorter, right the way through the stack, through delivery options, through packaging, and numerous other avenues. But absolutely, the drive from consumers to be more sustainable is as large as it's ever been, and for sure, it's a huge challenge, right? It's a big topic, and there's many different things to tackle. But I think for organisations, it's understanding what is the right thing for them to be working on right now, and what they should be looking at in 6 to 12 months' time, or perhaps longer. But for sure, the problem's not going to go away, and retailers need to tackle that head on.
No, absolutely. And I think the other thing you and I talked about when we were obviously preparing for this webinar was the fact that the topic, sustainability, environmental impact, whatever term you want to use, is enormous. And doesn't seem to be one size fits all. It covers the entire business, not just supply chain and logistics, but the whole business is now being impacted to drive sustainability goals and become more friendly to the environment. And I don't think we're going to cover off everything today, but we'll do our best to get as much. Okay, so just moving on slightly, because I suppose, as Paul's already hinted at, companies are struggling to find out, what it is and how efficient it can be. But if you actually look into to sort of, I suppose, what can be done from a sustainability perspective, there are some incredible gains to be made. And there's a clear link between driving sustainability in the supply chain and last mile, as well as optimization, so productivity gains. Accenture conducted a study a while back where they looked at, if companies were able to put more, I'm going to say, local fulfillment centers closer to urban areas, then there's a reduction in emissions by between 17 and 26%. Now, 17 and 26% is not a small number. And actually, when you look at the productivity gains that an organization would potentially get from that as well, I think what you're seeing is a clear link between productivity and obviously sustainability goals. I think the other thing that we're seeing is consumers are very open to options, but we also need some of that education. I think Ryan's going to touch on a couple of things later on as he talks through what Dyson have done. But consumers are out there to be educated. So once you get to that point of understanding, I think using what you can as an organization and across your ecosystem can absolutely drive some of that. Current assets and infrastructure shouldn't be ignored. I think everybody, the whole, concept of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, be very careful of, because actually there's a whole load of assets that companies have today that just probably need retrofitting and reusing and reconfiguring to help you do it. And obviously that needs to be done with partnerships and collaboration. I think, again, whether that be with your competitors, probably businesses aren't right there yet just yet, but look at your partners within the fulfillment space and what needs to be done post-purchase. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, and there's nothing stopping any organization working with anyone else. And I think the final bullet point around data is to get that understanding and to really know what's going on. And I think this kind of becomes that first step, if you like, for most organizations. Do most organizations actually understand, what the impact of what they're doing is today? Are the tools out there that are available? We're certainly moving in that way. So obviously, that's why we're here and what we're talking about. But actually understanding the lay of the land. What am I doing today and how can I improve it? But before I get to the how can I improve it, can I actually model some of what I'm trying to do? Can I get those sustainability dashboards? Can I get some of that asset usage information? It's pretty difficult right now because most organizations, the data that they're looking at is pretty fragmented. It's fragmented across their own business as well as externally as well. So again, it kind of comes back to that point of collaboration and partnership with the people that you're working with in your supply chain and
post-purchase
area with regards to last mile and looking at it.
Danny, I was going to say the use of data is sort of key to managing a sustainability strategy. Is it also something that can be used to help sort of plan what that strategy might be? Is it something that can help retailers who are put off by the seeming complexity of being more sustainable actually assess what they may gain from this before they actually do it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the kind of next step, Paul. So once you've got that understanding of the lay of the land, leveraging that data to actually model and look at what the journey looks like, because it's not a one size fits all. We're not talking about bringing anything in-house. It's all about collaboration. So modeling some of what needs to be done and when it can be done through transformation and business change is important. And I think that's really where the technology piece comes in terms of providing that capability to do that. But I think a lot of businesses, and would love to hear from as many as possible, they're still at that first stage of trying to get all of that fragmented data together and understand that lay of the land. Once you've got it, absolutely, it's about modeling and looking at, what does the journey look like in terms of getting me from where I am to where I want to get to.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's very important. I think an incremental approach as well is the way a lot of businesses are going to approach this.
Absolutely. And I think the opportunity is there. And maybe this kind of, I suppose, adds to the response to the question, Paul, which is, once I've got that data, obviously I'm going to plan the journey and look at what my transformation potentially looks like. But while I'm doing that, I'm probably going to get other things that are going to hit us. We're in a business, we're there day to day. Ryan can no doubt vouch for this stuff. But, being able to react a little bit quicker, look at changes in demand, look at changes in behavior, use that data, like I've said, to already educate those customers and create some what if scenarios. So I can start looking at, if I am looking to a more locally orientated last mile supply chain, what are the benefits? How can I then scale that across the business? What is the potential impact on my KPIs in terms of my business and how it operates? And actually then illustrating some of that back to our business, back to the shareholders, back to the investors. That's important, right? So getting there is also very, very important. And like I say, I think I keep harping on about this, but connecting and collaborating is super important as well. So I think that ability to do this with everybody and bring everybody to the party is the only way to do it.
Absolutely. I think collaboration is becoming essential, isn't it, really, as the sort of increasing use of sort of digital channels is now exploded, during the pandemic. I think we're seeing a lot more sort of connection and collaboration between all sorts of organizations to deliver the sort of, dare I use the word paradigm, but the new paradigm that many retailers face.
Definitely. And look, we're a technology company. We're a software company at FarEye. And we obviously, when we think about collaboration and we think about, interacting with our partners, yes, it's quite data focused and getting it under one umbrella, but it goes way beyond that in terms of, like I say, that physical collaboration. Put in that, if you're going to transform and change the business, it needs to be a coordinated effort with regards to your partners, your plans, your business strategy as well. So, we don't ignore that stuff as well.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, Danny, that's you got a bit more to say about ecosystems and collaboration.
It was the last slide, before I hand over to Ryan and Paul. So, I've got harped on about it a little bit, but ecosystems and collaboration. But, I think in my research where I've got to is, and I put retailer here, but no company can do this and achieve it independently. It does have to be a coordinated effort of investment in order to maximize the opportunity. Pooling resources is really good. So bring your partners into the kind of projects and into the initiatives that you have. But most importantly, and I know I probably would say this, but leverage that technology across your ecosystems. It will support the journey that you're on. And if I look at what we're doing from a company and what we're actually helping our customers do in regards to this topic, there's some pretty exciting stuff out there that people can do straight off the bat. It doesn't take too much thinking about to actually start achieving some of these goals and getting some benefits and getting on that journey with regards to where you want to get to as an organization.
Excellent. And I guess, Ryan, that's where we bring you in, because you're a company that's already on that sort of journey towards implementing some sustainability projects and tactics. Tell us a bit about what you're doing at Dyson.
Yeah, cheers, Paul. As Danny mentioned, it is a very, very broad topic. So I thought I'd try and hone in on maybe 4 or 5 key tangible things that we're doing at Dyson to try and drive our sustainability agenda. But I thought I'd start with this statement because it is really quite poignant. And so, Dyson was founded on a principle of lean engineering, so doing more with less. And arguably, that's the same mantra and philosophy that we're trying to take throughout our entire stack. So we'll talk through very briefly with regards to what we're doing from a website perspective, right through to our supply chain operations, final mile, collaboration with 3PRs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for us, and if I flick to the next slide, you've got to think green. Okay, so sustainability is not something that you can simply turn on and off as a switch. Okay, it needs to be built in to business planning. It's got to be translated through a business culture. And I know to many people, sustainability sounds like a buzzword, and it's often used to guilt businesses into adopting practices that seem to cost more and produce less. But for others, and particularly Dyson, it's not that. It's about ensuring that both the consumer, the shopper, and the business continue to thrive for years to come. And of course, customers are pushing brands to communicate their position, whether that's through creative packaging solutions, which we'll touch on shortly, whether that's through certifications, whether that's through conscious sourcing, or whether that's through their branded communications. I mean, e-commerce presents a number of challenges, plentiful challenges, but equally opportunities to drive a more sustainable agenda. And so I thought we would start off by, this is not a Dyson example, but I think this is a perfect example of how brand ethos really drives an organization forward. So this, obviously, environmental stewardship is a position increasingly expected of brands by consumers, right? And in particular, younger demographics, Gen Z, as an example. And there are a growing number of consumers that are continuously seeking out companies with more sustainable practices. Okay, there's many white papers out there that tell us this, and so it's important that you put your brand ethos front and center where you can. And so your business model has to be focused on sustainability. In this example, 4Ocean, online retailer, whole business model focused on sustainability. Sell bracelets, apparel goods, but dedicated to returning some of those profits to helping clean up the Earth's oceans of plastics. And so you've really got to push that front and center, and you can't greenwash consumers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. If I start at the sort of the top of the chain, what is the low-hanging fruit for retailers? What's some of the tangible things you can do? And the first thing I would call out is platform content. So irrespective of the product that you're selling, it's absolutely no secret that e-commerce, with its chain of distribution, packaging, fulfillment, returns, contributes to the production of carbon emissions, right? There's no two ways about it. But one of the important parts of that chain that can be resolved, in my opinion, very, very quickly, and which is free of charge to retailers, is the product listing pages. E-commerce listings, in my view, should be audited regularly. How often do brands publish a page and don't look at that page for weeks, months, potentially even years, right? So it's critical that they're audited regularly so that the product information is correct. So having transparent product descriptions, answering frequently asked questions, ultimately, so that the idea is that you reduce the number of turns. Now, I know returns is an element of e-commerce that we can't get away with, but anything that we can do practically that allows us to reduce the number of returns, and so reduce the number of transportations and movement of stock around, can only be a good thing. So my first tip for retailers is audit your product listings regularly, particularly those that are fashion apparel. That's things like colorways, weights, dimensions, all of those things that can help a customer build up a better understanding of the product that you're selling. And then moving on, I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about packaging alone, but this is probably one of the more straightforward things that a retailer could do, and that's adapt their packaging so that it is more recyclable, or even seen examples of reusing packaging for other things. But packaging, of course, if anybody's ordered anything off Amazon, you've probably ordered an iPhone case and it's come in a canoe-sized box with a ton of filler, right? That is not sustainable, and so it really must be recyclable and reusable, and that transfers through everything with regards to compostable tape and everything else with regards to packaging. In an ideal world, of course, you don't want to have any filler whatsoever. I know that's not always possible for all retailers, but we've looked at examples recently at Dyson whereby we're trying to move to an FTP, a fit to product packaging solution. So rather than having your standard 5 or 6 different carton sizes, can we build those cartons, those boxes on the fly that allows us to fit them to the unique dimensions of the vast range of products that we sell? So again, we talked about collaboration earlier. That isn't something that you can always necessarily do on your own as a retailer, particularly if you're not doing the fulfillment side. But that's why working closely with your 3PL partner or your warehouse becomes really, really important. And I'm sure we'll talk more about packaging as we go through. But it's it's a really important part of the process, particularly that unboxing experience as well. You want that to be as eye-opening as possible. It's really experiential, so having a really good packaging solution is key. And we've seen examples. Again, I'm going to use some apparel examples. The likes of Zalando, the likes of ASOS using recyclable mailers. Whether that's through click and collect, and we'll talk more about that shortly. But there's a wide range of options out there, and I would strongly urge retailers to go and find alternative packaging solutions if they're currently using plastics or others to ship their goods.
I was going to say, Ryan, on the packaging front, I think part of the unboxing experience now is increasingly about not having necessarily a wow factor as such, but a wow factor that's also, wow, this is going to be easy to recycle.
Absolutely.
So it's not a mixture of different materials where some's recyclable, some isn't. Even simple things of unboxing sort of reasonably large things is how to fold it up and get it in your recycling bin. So I think
agree more.
There's all these fairly prosaic approaches that towards packaging that can actually have a huge impact on what that new style of unboxing experience is.
Couldn't agree more. And we've not touched on things like what else goes in the box, right? But printed returns, labels and stuff like that. Can we get away from that? Can we digitize that so that the consumer doesn't have to sift through all that when they unbox their item? And it's probably a conversation for another day. But you're absolutely right. Packaging, I think, is one thing that retailers can get a lot smarter at, and in a relatively quick time as well.
Yeah,
but
it's one of the easy things, isn't it?
Indeed. If we move on to the shipping side, because I know that's we're talking more about the final mile. Consumers demand. I should have put demand sustainable choices, but they need them. So getting products to consumers, as we know, can vary in limitless ways. One delivery option for one retailer is not necessarily going to be the same for another, and arguably the same. A customer might choose different delivery options based on different items that they're ordering, or for the relative desire to have that quicker, right? So we take the heat wave that we've had recently. Somebody may want a fan to cool them down tonight, so that might be a same-day service versus something that they can wait a little bit longer for. So consumers need choice, but I guess what does that mean for retail? How do you do that? And you've got to leverage data and technology, right? Danny mentioned that the whole data point, but technology is a key enabler for many retailers, but particularly Dyson as well. So I guess the big one that we've implemented in the last couple of years is a carrier management system or delivery management platform. That has allowed us to access a wide network of carrier partners, of which a good percentage of those are eco-delivery providers. And we are working with a number as we speak right now, PAC being one of those examples where we are able to complete that final mile using things like electric cargo bikes or electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. So I would strongly urge retailers to look at technology as an enabler rather than something to scare your IT arm with, because it can really expedite that process. And of course, nothing is, this is not going to stop. Consumers are going to continue to demand more and more from retail partners. So you need to offer sustainable choice. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you need to offer green delivery options at checkout. So Danny mentioned a number of white papers. We can share some afterwards as well, which talk explicitly about this. But it needs to be part of a wider portfolio of options. And what I mean by that is it's no good just simply dropping a green delivery option in the checkout, because that might not always be the right option for every customer. So you need to make sure that it sits within a wider range or a wider portfolio of delivery options, whether that's home delivery, out of home delivery, to ensure that customers can make the choice. And ultimately, it is about the consumer still being in control of that experience. And so for us, making sure that we have at least a green option as part of every checkout experience that the customer goes through.
Is there any evidence, Ryan, and also Danny, that some consumers would pay more for the greener delivery option?
There is. I'm sure we can share some stats with you afterwards, but there was a recent study done, and I can't quote the exact source, but I will afterwards, where absolutely European customers are up to, I think, 24% more likely or willing to accept a charge for green delivery if they know that delivery will occur on a green van, cargo bike, etc. So we've certainly seen it. We've done some trials internally at Dyson, and again, it depends on your price point. But given the amount that these consumers are spending, it is certainly something that we've looked at, and consumers are willing to pay for. And actually, I know green doesn't always mean slower, but we've seen consumers arguably accept that they may deliver slightly slower for a consolidated delivery, and again, they're happy to wait for that.
Yes, seen a lot of evidence of that starting to emerge, I have to say. I've always thought that, much like a lot of retailers ask if you want to donate £1 to charity at checkout, whether there's an option to sort of stick something like that in for a green delivery. So, would you pay another £5 towards it coming on an electric van like the DPD one that is there? Just little things like that right at the end of the checkout process. Often people will click on it, particularly like you say, on something that's reasonably high price point or medium to high price point. They probably will.
Indeed, and you've kind of put me into a nice little segue for my next two slides, actually, Paul, which is you've got to educate consumers. I know Danny mentioned that. It's you can't just expect that the customer knows what a green delivery option is, so you need to tell them. I've drawn on an example here from Sainsbury's, but Ocado and various other food retailers have done this well over the last couple of years, and ultimately it comes down to, obviously in these examples, they own their own network, right, and their own fleet, but if we can leverage the data from the carriers to understand that there's a delivery happening in our street next Tuesday, next Wednesday, why couldn't we piggyback off that and offer, like you said, an incentive to use that service, because we don't need to put another truck down that road. And so I think educating consumers is important, and we'll touch on shortly out of home delivery, which is equally a way of reducing your carbon footprint. But at Dyson, we haven't launched yet, but we're going through some beta trials at the moment that looks around how do we serve up greener credentials in the checkout to help consumers understand what that means, whether that's a next day service versus a same day, or whether that's a slightly slower service. But these are the things that we're working through in beta trial. And you mentioned it, Paul. You said incentivizing, and of course, you can incentivize consumers by pulling on the heartstrings in offering to donate to charity, or we couldn't go through a whole session without talking about Amazon, could we? Or you can do the Amazon type effect, which is incentivize them with credits. And I'm sure there are ways that retailers can work this into their own systems as well. But in this US example, by taking a slower delivery, you could get a credit back on your Amazon account so that it could be used against for next purchase. We've seen that in the UK as well, where they were doing a £1 credit. Again, I would stress that I suspect Amazon are doing this more so because they want to deliver these goods into their lockers, and so therefore reducing their costs as well as the emissions. But again, it's something for retailers to bear in mind, particularly when they're partnering with carriers, to understand, can they do this? Can we leverage the data? Can we make that real time enough to be able to serve that content in a checkout? And so perhaps incentivizing for no rush options will be key. And then Danny mentioned this one, shortening the final mile. Again, this is probably a topic in its own right, and I won't dwell too much on it, but there's often the thought of, as a retailer, are we likely to put 100 forward stocking locations up around the UK or globally? Probably not. Okay, we have a limited storefront, as do many retailers, but shortening the final mile means collaborating with 3PLs that can put that product closer to the consumer. And we ask ourselves, why do you want to do that? Well, it means that many of the deliveries that occur from those locations are more likely to happen on a more sustainable transportation method, right? So bikes, vehicles which don't have the really long ranges of the diesel vehicles. So again, data, again, we keep going back to it, but it's important because you need to know what products are selling well in which areas, and it goes back to having very, very clear understanding of inventory and stock control as a retailer to make sure that you have the product in the right place at all time. But again, micro fulfillment, particularly useful for retailers that have peaks, heat peaks, etc., and understanding the demographics. I read a Metapack report from, I think, last year saying that 70% of deliveries occur in something like 10% of the geographic landmass of the UK. So having strategic partnerships with fulfillment centres that are geographically positioned in those areas makes sense, right? Rather than shipping from, for example, a DC that might be in the southwest all the way up to the northeast, for example. So things like that you can get smart with. But again, it's all about collaborating, and you need to speak to your 3PL partners to understand how that can work. Click and collect is something that we've driven in the last 3 years. We recognise that out-of-home delivery is growing, particularly through the COVID pandemic, and it is another effective way to help consumers shrink their shopping footprint. Again, education is key, and I've seen in-post reports recently that suggest that perhaps deliveries to parcel lockers may be 2/3 less harmful for the environment compared to home delivery. I know Doddle have done many of these reports before, but you've got to offer that. And again, technology is an enabler for this. Carriers offer these services, albeit sometimes to proprietary systems, but they are available. And so whether it's UPS lockers, whether it's in-post, there is hundreds of these available. Speak to your carrier partners, see if they can support, because it's a great way of shrinking the footprint. Of course, the rationale being that the carrier makes one delivery of say 50 parcels to a locker rather than 50 individual deliveries to single addresses. And so we believe at Dyson that click and collect is going to grow, and we will continue to expand that offering. Now, of course, we don't have a huge store footprint, so we need to leverage third-party networks to support that. But if you have a good store footprint, then I would highly recommend leveraging those store footprints to be able to do things like click and collect into store. So again, something else for retailers to think about.
Sorry, Ryan, to interrupt you. Just on that out-of-home delivery side, is there also a need for retailers and brands like yourself to educate consumers about lockers in particular? Because I must admit, me personally, but I do live in the middle of nowhere, so getting to a locker is a sort of fairly hefty undertaking. I would rather have it delivered to my home rather than have to go and collect it from somewhere. But I might be atypical. I don't know. But are you seeing sort of demand from consumers that they're happy to use lockers, or is it something that retailers need to maybe do a bit of work on to encourage them to use lockers, particularly showing them the environmental advantage? You say it could be sort of 30-40% more efficient to from a sort of emissions point of view to deliver them to a locker. Is that a sort of idea that could be sold to consumers?
Definitely the latter, Paul. Yeah, the consumers do need educating for sure. We've certainly seen an uplift as a result of doing some beta trials when we explain the benefits to them more concisely. I guess the out-of-home delivery thing is interesting because you'd imagine during the COVID pandemic with people being at home that home delivery would soar, and as it has done, rightly so. But there is always the counter argument, which is most of these are not just lockers. There's partial shops, etc., where you can collect your goods up to say 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so if you're in the office and you're not in between 9 and 5, these are alternative options, typically in walking distance. I grant you not always, but typically in walking distance to things like a post office or a Hermes shop, etc., that will allow you to go and collect late. And so particularly if you have a store network as well, added value, of course, that your consumer brings that extra footfall. And so you may be able to do cross-selling as the customer comes in. But it is about education, because I think there's a stigma attached to out-of-home delivery that you have to go miles or you have to go on a certain day. But it's all digitized now with codes, etc., that make it so much more straightforward for consumers. And it's about convenience, right? If you don't want to book a half day off work or a full day off work just to wait for a package to come in, then why not just pick it up on your way home? And these lockers happen to be in all sorts of locations, right? Train stations, etc., etc. So I think it comes down to convenience. And we certainly believe that from an environmental perspective, that if we can drive more traffic to those locations, it can only be a good thing. But we'll probably have to incentivize them to do that.
Excellent. Interesting.
And then my final couple of slides, Paul, actually. So circular economy, again, we couldn't really have a session on sustainability without talking about circular economy. So Dyson traditionally has done things like trade-in, which is if you order a new product, you can trade in your old machine for typically a discount. But in more recent years, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months, we've worked on refurbishing goods. So rather than those being recycled, of which many of the materials are, we will refurbish goods and give them a new lease of life. And so we sell them on our outlet channel. We tend to call them graded machines. They still come with a warranty and a guarantee, fully certified. But it means that these machines that may otherwise have been scrapped will now find their way into hands of new owners. And so it opens up a different demographic for consumers that may not have been able to spend the full price on an A-grade machine. They can now buy a graded machine. But then it opens up all sorts of new channels. So if you don't want to sell that on your traditional .com site, think about selling these on marketplaces so that you have channel separation. There's all sorts of things that you can do here, but the whole circular economy thing is only going to get bigger, stronger, and Dyson will continue to spend time and effort making this as seamless as possible, whether that's collections, refurbs, etc., etc. So we see that as being a big part of the business over the coming years. And I guess my final slide, Paul, is communication and collaboration. So, as a retailer, we can't do all of these things ourselves. And the only way that we can really move forward on a lot of this is to collaborate with our 3PLs, our carrier partners, etc. And so very much like Danny and our technology providers as well, it's an ecosystem, right? And so you can only do these things if you're prepared to get your heads together and work out creative solutions to problems. And I particularly point that towards carriers as well, because they're quite sensitive about opening up their networks to others. But it's a good example of where if there was collaboration within the industry, I think we would find very quickly some big wins. So my call out here is don't be afraid to have these conversations with your technology and logistics partners, because there's quite often creative solutions that can overcome these challenges.
Excellent. Yes, very interesting. Great cartoon as well. That sums it up beautifully. That's really interesting, right? It's really interesting to hear what Dyson's doing and what your views of it are. Before I throw some questions at Danny also, I assume you're being Dyson sort of driven to this largely by consumer pressure. Really, is that where
I would say two sides, Paul. Intrinsically, so the business has publishes a blueprint every year, and sustainability cuts right through the blueprint. So we have a sustainability director who wakes up every morning thinking, how are we going to drive the sustainability agenda at Dyson? And then there's a whole range of things that we won't touch on today, but so it's internally, everybody is empowered as an employee to make those green choices, and then ultimately consumers are demanding it of us, right? So we're getting it from both ends. We're getting squeezed, but in a good way, because we all recognise it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So, Danny, you've seen what Dyson is doing, sort of at the sort of coalface, as it were, facing the consumers. What sort of data solutions can a company like yours bring to this that can help them do those around things like last mile and I guess around delivery to collection points, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's obviously a wide range of things, Paul, and this is, as we said, it's a broad subject. But I think where we're doing things is we're working with our customers to get there. Ryan touched on a couple of things earlier. So returns, great area to have a look at, right? So returns can take every company wants to minimize their returns in terms of whether they be orders or deliveries that arrive where customers aren't available. So it's kind of a second trip to actually get the delivery done, or whether it's the wrong product or whatever it may be. But returns is a great area to look at, digitizing that process, removing the paper from the box so that people can scan a barcode or a QR code on their order to actually then return a product and take it to a pick up and drop off location. Great stuff. We're doing lots of things like that. Further up the chain in terms of optimization around actually delivery and how do I make that more efficient? We're embedding things like AI into our algorithms so that they're learning continually with regards to areas of a city, delivery types, customers, and leveraging that so that we can actually optimize the routing, the fulfillment piece that actually happens there as well. And then I think those services that we're demanding as consumers as well, it's just the nature of the beast kind of thing that as we demand more services, the whole solution becomes more and more complex because there's just more to do. And I think looking at incentives to get our customers and educate them towards taking the right service that fits in with both sustainability goals and costs is down to us as a group of technology providers, third-party carriers, and obviously retailers and brands to do that. We've got to partner up to do some of those things to enable them for our customers. Because I don't think the incentives just come from we'll give you £1 cheaper or we'll do free delivery. Go back to something you said, Paul. You live in not an urban area, but if we actually educated you towards how much it costs from an environmental impact to deliver a parcel to your home rather than you go pick it up from a central location in your village or wherever that may be, you're incentivized. It doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, but that's how the data can actually help, right? And drive consumer behavior.
No, you're right. I am part of the problem, not the solution. I need to just get on my Shanks's pony and actually walk to the garage up the road that does do collections for Hermes, I think it is. Yes, no, absolutely. So I think, guys, that's really covered as best we can. Well, we've scratched the surface, really, haven't we, on sustainability? But I think there's some interesting things there to help get people going. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, I think from my perspective, what I see talking to retailers is their biggest challenge they see is they sort of don't know where to start, because it appears to be so complex, so broad, potentially requiring a complete re-engineering of their business processes and phenomenally expensive. I think you've clearly demonstrated that it doesn't need to be like that. So just before we finish, Ryan, what would be your one piece of advice to a retailer watching this who's thinking, I've really got to do something about sustainability? What to do? Where do I start?
I think I will finish by saying, Paul, someone needs to own that within the organisation. Don't assume that somebody else is going to do it. So appoint somebody that is responsible for doing that, and don't try and bite too much off early days. Right? Find the low-hanging fruit. Work with your, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So sweat your assets, leverage what you've got first, and then find alternative ways to improve your operations, your efficiency, etc. But I would say someone needs to take the bull by the horns to start with and drive that agenda internally. It's a cultural thing. Once one or two pick it up, it permeates throughout the organisation. So I think it's about giving somebody that responsibility from day one.
Excellent. And Danny, final words from your point of view, what would be your one piece of advice?
I think apart from the data thing and trying to put that central to what you're trying to do, which I think is super important, it's that collaboration with both your technology providers, your partners, your internal partners, your sustainability chief. The only way to actually solve this is actually to work together. And I think we all have a role to play in that, whether that be from a physical operational perspective, whether it's a software technology perspective, or whether it's as a consumer. You get those ideas out on the table. There's lots of innovation. Happening, and I think it's a how do we harness that to the good of our business? It's definitely something I would encourage people to do. Get out there and talk to each other.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, on that, Ryan, Danny, thank you very much for taking the time to talk us through that. There's been some really interesting things there. I'm sure people will have lots of questions that they can email through to us. We'll put some contact details up at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to that. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you and goodbye.